Picture a dark, quiet night in a bustling city. Two individuals, Alice and Bob, are partners in crime, having just committed a high-profile burglary. However, the police received an anonymous tip and were ready for them. As Alice and Bob attempt to flee the scene, they are captured and arrested. The authorities have enough circumstantial evidence to suspect Alice and Bob's involvement, but not enough for a definitive conviction. To build a stronger case, the police decide to employ a classic strategy. They separate Alice and Bob, placing them in isolated cells. The strategy is simple yet effective. Isolate the suspects, create uncertainty, and leverage the fear of betrayal to elicit confessions. Alice and Bob, now alone and uncertain of each other's fate, face the grim reality of their situation. They know the evidence is weak, but they also understand that their silence or confession will determine their future. The police capitalize on this fear and uncertainty, setting the stage for a psychological battle that will test their loyalty and resolve. In their separate cells, Alice and Bob each ponder their next move. The stakes are high, and their decisions will have significant consequences. The pressure mounts as they await the prosecutor's offer, knowing that their fate lies in the balance. Chapter 2: The Deal. The prosecutor approaches Alice and Bob separately, presenting them with a tempting yet dangerous offer designed to exploit their fear and uncertainty. Here's how the deal is structured. If both Alice and Bob confess, they will each receive a moderate sentence of 5 years in prison. This outcome is bad, but it's not the worst. If Alice confesses but Bob remains silent, Alice will go free, rewarded for her cooperation, while Bob will bear the full brunt of the law with a harsh sentence of 10 years. The reverse also holds true if Bob confesses and Alice remains silent. If both remain silent, the prosecutor can only convict them on a lesser charge, resulting in a light sentence of 1 year each. This offer puts both Alice and Bob in a difficult position. The dilemma hinges on their inability to communicate, leaving them to rely on their judgment of the other's character and the situation. Alice and Bob now face a classic dilemma that pits self-preservation against mutual benefit. The rational choice for self-preservation is to confess, as it minimizes the maximum potential sentence. However, this rational choice leads to a collectively worse outcome for both, as mutual confession results in a 5-year sentence each, worse than the 1-year sentence they would each face if they both remained silent. Let's consider Alice's perspective in more detail. If Alice believes that Bob will confess, her best option is to confess as well, resulting in a sentence of 5 years instead of risking 10 years by remaining silent. If Alice believes that Bob will remain silent, her best option is still to confess, as this would lead to her going free while Bob serves 10 years. From Bob's perspective, the logic is identical. If Bob believes that Alice will confess, his best option is to confess as well, resulting in a 5-year sentence instead of 10 years by remaining silent. If Bob believes that Alice will remain silent, his best option is to confess, leading to his release while Alice serves 10 years. Individually, the rational choice for both Alice and Bob is to confess. This decision minimizes their potential maximum sentence, but leads to a situation where both confess and each receives a 5-year sentence, which is collectively worse than if they both had remained silent. This intricate dance of decision-making, driven by uncertainty and self-preservation, forms the core of the prisoner's dilemma. Alice and Bob must navigate this complex psychological landscape, balancing trust, fear, and rationality. Their choices will not only determine their fate, but also illustrate the profound challenges inherent in cooperative decision-making under uncertainty. As Alice and Bob sit in their cells, the weight of the dilemma presses heavily on their minds. The prosecutor's offer, designed to induce confession through fear of betrayal, encapsulates the tension between individual rationality and collective benefit. This setup creates a fertile ground for exploring the depths of human behavior, trust, and decision-making. Chapter 3: The Rational Choice. Now that we have established the setup, let's dive into the heart of the dilemma. Alice and Bob are each isolated in their cells, faced with a crucial decision: to confess or to remain silent. This decision is complicated by their inability to communicate and the uncertainty about what the other will choose. Each suspect is driven by the desire to minimize their own punishment, which creates a tension between their individual rationality and the potential collective benefit. From Alice's perspective, she must consider two scenarios: what happens if Bob confesses, and what happens if Bob remains silent. If Bob confesses, Alice's options are to either confess or remain silent. If Alice confesses, both she and Bob will receive a 5-year sentence. If Alice remains silent, she will receive a 10-year sentence while Bob goes free. Given these options, confessing results in a better outcome, 5 years, compared to remaining silent 10 years. If Bob remains silent, again, Alice's options are to either confess or remain silent. If Alice confesses, she will go free while Bob receives a 10-year sentence. If Alice remains silent, both she and Bob will receive a 1-year sentence. In this scenario, confessing results in the best possible outcome for Alice, freedom, compared to remaining silent, 1 year. Given these considerations, Alice's rational choice is to confess in both scenarios. Confessing either results in her going free, if Bob remains silent, or a reduced sentence, if Bob also confesses. This logic is mirrored for Bob as well, leading him to the same rational choice to confess. This leads us to the core of the prisoner's dilemma. Both Alice and Bob, acting in their rational self-interest, choose to confess. This results in both receiving a 5-year sentence, which is worse than if they had both remained silent and received only a 1-year sentence each. Chapter 4. Payoff. Nash equilibrium. This occurs when both Alice and Bob choose to confess. In this scenario, neither can improve their outcome by changing their decision alone. Both receive a 5-year sentence. Pareto. Optimal. This occurs when both Alice and Bob remain silent, resulting in the least total prison time, 1 year each, 2 years total. This outcome is better for both, but requires trust and cooperation, which is difficult to achieve without communication. The Nash equilibrium in this dilemma demonstrates the challenge of achieving the best collective outcome when individuals act in their self-interest without coordination. Even though mutual silence would lead to a better outcome for both, the fear of being betrayed by the other leads each to choose to confess. Nash equilibrium, named after mathematician John Nash, this concept describes a situation where each player's strategy is optimal given the other player's strategy. In other words, neither player can unilaterally improve their outcome by changing their strategy. In the prisoner's dilemma, both confessing is the Nash equilibrium because, given the other's decision to confess, neither Alice nor Bob can reduce their sentence by changing their own decision. Pareto optimality, named after economist Vilfredo Pareto, this concept describes a situation where it is impossible to make one individual better off without making at least one other individual worse off. In the prisoner's dilemma, both remaining silent is Pareto optimal, because any deviation from this outcome would make at least one individual worse off. However, achieving Pareto optimality requires mutual trust and cooperation, which is challenging in the isolated setup of the dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma effectively illustrates the tension between individual rationality and collective benefit. Chapter 5. Beyond the prison. The prisoner's dilemma is more than just a theoretical puzzle. It has profound implications for real-world scenarios across various domains. Consider the case of an arms race between two rival nations. Each country wants to ensure its security by building up its military capabilities. The logic is straightforward. If one country arms itself and the other doesn't, the armed country gains a significant advantage. However, if both countries escalate their arms, they end up in a state of mutual distrust and increased military expenditure without a corresponding increase in security. If both countries disarm, both can allocate resources to other areas like education or healthcare and enjoy peace. If one country arms while the other disarms, the armed country has a security advantage. If both countries arm, both countries face high costs and heightened tensions. The rational choice for each country, fearing the other's potential to arm, is to continue building up their military. This leads to a suboptimal outcome of mutual escalation and higher costs, much like the mutual confession in the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine two competing firms, each considering whether to lower their prices to gain market share. If both firms maintain high prices, they enjoy healthy profits. However, if one firm lowers its prices while the other maintains high prices, the firm with lower prices gains market share. If both firms lower their prices, they enter a price war, leading to reduced profits for both. If both firms maintain high prices, both enjoy higher profits. If one firm lowers prices while the other maintains high prices, the firm with lower prices gains market share. If both firms lower prices, both suffer reduced profits. The rational choice for each firm, fearing the other might lower prices, is to lower their own prices. This results in a suboptimal outcome of reduced profits for both, akin to mutual confession in the prisoner's dilemma. Nations face a dilemma when it comes to environmental conservation. Each nation benefits from exploiting natural resources for economic gain. But if all nations do so, the environment suffers, leading to long-term consequences for everyone. If all nations conserve, the environment is preserved, benefiting everyone. If one nation exploits resources while others conserve, the exploiting nation gains economic benefits. If all nations exploit resources, the environment deteriorates, leading to negative outcomes for all. The rational choice for each nation, fearing that others might exploit resources, is to exploit resources themselves. This results in environmental degradation, a suboptimal outcome that mirrors the mutual confession scenario in the prisoner's dilemma. The dilemma underscores the importance of finding ways to encourage cooperative behavior to achieve better collective outcomes. Chapter 6: Overcoming the Dilemma. Repeated interactions. One powerful strategy to foster cooperation is the concept of repeated interactions, also known as the iterated prisoner's dilemma. When parties engage in repeated interactions, the potential for future cooperation incentivizes cooperative behavior in the present. The fear of retaliation or the promise of future rewards encourages individuals to act cooperatively. For example, in business relationships, companies that expect to engage in future transactions are more likely to cooperate, knowing that betrayal could jeopardize long-term benefits. Reputation. Building and maintaining a reputation for cooperation is another effective strategy. Reputation acts as a signal to others that one is trustworthy and likely to cooperate. In many scenarios, parties are motivated to cooperate to preserve their reputation and foster trust. In online marketplaces, for instance, sellers with high ratings and positive reviews are more likely to attract buyers, encouraging them to maintain cooperative behavior. In social networks, individuals who consistently act cooperatively are more likely to receive support and cooperation from others. Communication. Establishing channels for communication can significantly reduce the uncertainty that drives the prisoner's dilemma. Even indirect communication or signaling can help align expectations and foster trust. By discussing potential strategies and outcomes, parties can coordinate their actions and agree on cooperative strategies. For example, in labor negotiations, open communication between management and workers can lead to mutually beneficial agreements. In environmental conservation, international summits and agreements provide platforms for nations to communicate and coordinate their efforts. Enforcement mechanisms, implementing rules or agreements with penalties for defection, can also encourage cooperation. Regulatory frameworks and oversight ensure that parties adhere to cooperative strategies and deter betrayal. For instance, international treaties with enforcement mechanisms, such as trade sanctions or diplomatic consequences, can ensure that countries honor their commitments. In organizations, contractual agreements with clear penalties for breach of contract can promote cooperation among partners. Arms control treaties. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union faced the prisoner's dilemma in their arms race. Through negotiations and treaties like the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START, they established mutual agreements to reduce their nuclear arsenals, overcoming the dilemma and reducing the risk of mutual destruction. Environmental agreements. The Paris Agreement is an example of nations coming together to address climate change. By setting collective goals and establishing mechanisms for accountability, countries are encouraged to cooperate in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Community-based resource management. In many communities, local governance structures manage shared resources like fisheries and forests. Through established rules and communal oversight, members cooperate to sustainably manage resources, avoiding the tragedy of the commons. The prisoner's dilemma is a powerful illustration of the tension between individual rationality and collective benefit.